He agreed to one last blind date at a cafe. She walked in and said, "I'm only here because I owe you my life." Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Marcus Reed checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 6:47. He'd promised his sister he'd give this exactly 15 minutes, maybe 20 if the woman wasn't completely unbearable. And then he was out. Done. Finished with the whole blind date nightmare his sister Jessica kept forcing on him like some kind of twisted therapy. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and dark roast coffee, that kind of warm, lived-in smell that made you want to curl up with a book and forget the world existed. Second Chances Cafe, Jessica called it. And yeah, the irony wasn't lost on him. She'd begged him to buy the place for her after she left nursing. Said she needed something quieter, something that didn't involve watching people die every other Tuesday. He couldn't say no to his little sister, never could. So now here he sat in a cafe he owned, waiting for a woman he'd never met, wondering what the hell he was doing with his life. The door opened and a gust of cold November air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. Marcus glanced up and saw her. She wasn't what he expected. Not that he'd really expected anything. Simple navy dress, hair pulled back in a low ponytail like she'd done it in the car, coat wrapped tight around her like armor. She looked tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't go away after a good night's sleep. Their eyes met across the half-empty cafe, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then she walked over. No smile, no nervous energy, just straight-up exhaustion mixed with something that looked a whole lot like resignation. She dropped into the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "You must be Marcus," she said, and her voice was flat, like she'd already decided how this was going to go. "And you must be Rachel," he replied, leaning back slightly. She didn't look at the menu, didn't glance around the cafe, just kept her eyes on him like she was sizing up an opponent before a fight. "Let's just get this out in the open," she said, and wow, okay, so they were diving right in. "I'm only here because your sister saved my life 6 months ago. Car accident, nasty one, and she pulled me out before the whole thing went up in flames, so I owe her. That's why I'm sitting here. I'm giving this 30 minutes, then we both get to tell her we tried and we never have to do this again." Marcus blinked. In 3 years of half-hearted dating attempts, nobody had ever opened with that level of brutal honesty. Most women spent the first 20 minutes pretending they weren't trying to figure out his net worth or whether his penthouse had a good view. This woman just threw all her cards on the table like she was too tired to play games. He couldn't help it, he smiled. "That's the most honest thing anyone's said to me in months," he admitted. She raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm too old and too tired to pretend I want to be here." "No offense." "None taken," Marcus said, and he meant it. "For what it's worth, my sister ambushed me into this too. Told me if I didn't show up, she'd start setting up dates during my board meetings." Rachel's lips twitched, almost a smile but not quite. "She's relentless like that. You have no idea." The waitress, one of Jessica's part-timers, came over and took their orders. Black coffee for him, chamomile tea for her. They sat in awkward silence for about 10 seconds before Marcus figured what the hell. Might as well talk. "So what do you do, Rachel?" She shrugged. "I count medical supplies in a warehouse. Boxes of gloves, syringes, bandages, all day, every day. Real thrilling stuff." The way she said it, so flat and bitter, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't what she wanted to be doing. This was what she'd ended up doing. "Sounds fulfilling," he said dryly. "It's not," she shot back, "but it pays the bills and I don't have to think." "What about you?" "I run a tech company," he said, keeping it vague. "Bought this cafe for my sister because she needed a change." Rachel looked around the cafe for the first time, really looked at it, taking in the exposed brick walls, the mismatched chairs, the shelves stuffed with used books. "It's nice," she said quietly. "Feels real." He nodded. "Yeah, that's why she wanted it." "You said you count medical supplies," Marcus continued. "What did you do before?" Her whole body went tight, like he'd just stepped on a landmine. "I was a paramedic," she said, voice careful, controlled. "Why'd you quit?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. Rachel's eyes went distant, staring at something he couldn't see. Same reason you're sitting here on a blind date you don't want, she finally said, because life punched me in the face and I stayed down. Before Marcus could respond, the cafe doors slammed open and a blur of movement shot across the room. Dad! Marcus turned just in time to catch his 6-year-old son, Owen, as the kid launched himself into his arms. Whoa, buddy, what are you doing here? Owen's babysitter, Mrs. Chen, hurried in behind him, looking apologetic. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. Family emergency. I had to bring him. Jessica said it was okay. Owen wiggled out of his dad's arms and immediately zeroed in on Rachel with that unsettling kid radar that picks up on everything adults try to hide. Are you my dad's friend? He asked, tilting his head. Rachel's expression softened just a fraction. I don't think so, buddy. Just someone having coffee. Owen studied her for a second, then said matter-of-factly, My mom used to like coffee. She's dead now, but she's not sad anymore, because heaven has good coffee. The silence that followed could have swallowed the whole cafe. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, that familiar ache punching through his chest. Rachel just stared at Owen, her lips parted slightly, eyes suddenly bright with tears she was clearly fighting not to show. Owen, Marcus started, but Rachel held up a hand. No, it's okay, she said, and her voice cracked just a little. It's okay. Owen, completely unaware of the emotional bomb he just dropped, climbed into the chair next to Rachel and pulled a plastic dinosaur out of his backpack. Want to see my T-Rex? His name is Rexy because I'm 6 and not very creative yet. That got a small laugh out of Rachel, a real one, and Marcus watched something shift in her face. The walls came down just a little, enough for him to see the person underneath all that exhaustion and pain. Jessica appeared with a mug of hot chocolate, extra whipped cream piled high, and set it in front of Owen. There you go, monster. Careful, it's hot. Owen grinned and immediately grabbed the mug with both hands. Rachel reached over without thinking and adjusted his grip so he wouldn't spill it. There you go, nice and steady, she said softly, and Owen beamed at her like she'd just solved world hunger. Marcus watched the two of them, his son chattering about dinosaurs, and this woman he'd met 20 minutes ago actually listening, actually engaging, and he felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Then Owen took a sip of his hot chocolate and started coughing. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it, just a kid drinking too fast. But then Owen coughed again, harder, and his little hand flew to his throat. Owen? Marcus's stomach dropped. Buddy, you okay? Owen's eyes went wide, scared, and he shook his head. His face started to swell, lips puffing up, red blotches spreading across his cheeks. Oh, God, Marcus breathed, his hands already reaching for the EpiPen clipped to Owen's belt. But his fingers were shaking too hard, wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't work. Owen, hold on, I've got you, I've got... Rachel's hand shot out and grabbed the EpiPen from Marcus's trembling fingers. Her entire demeanor changed in half a second, going from exhausted and broken to cold, sharp, clinical. Anaphylaxis, she said, her voice cutting through the rising panic like a blade. Marcus, call 911, right now. She didn't wait for him to respond. She pulled Owen toward her, her movements fast but controlled, and pressed the auto-injector against his thigh. The click echoed in the suddenly silent cafe. Owen gasped, a horrible, wet sound, and Rachel kept her hands steady on his leg, counting under her breath. Come on, buddy, come on, you're okay, you're gonna be okay. Marcus had his phone out, was talking to the dispatcher, but his eyes never left his son's face. Owen's breathing started to ease, just a little, the swelling slowing down, and Rachel didn't let go of him, didn't move, just kept whispering, You're okay. I've got you. You're okay. The paramedic who'd quit 2 years ago didn't hesitate for even a second. But as the ambulance sirens started wailing in the distance, Marcus saw her hands begin to tremble. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something that looked a whole lot like ghosts she thought she'd buried coming back to life. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind the kind of quiet that felt too big for the room. Second chances. Café sat half-lit and empty now, chairs still scattered from when everyone rushed over to see what was happening. Rachel sat alone at the table where everything went sideways, her hands flat on the wood like she was trying to ground herself to something solid. She couldn't stop staring at her fingers. They'd moved so fast with that EpiPen, muscle memory kicking in like no time had passed at all, like she hadn't spent 2 whole years running away from being that person. Her hands were shaking now, though, delayed reaction hitting her all at once, and she pressed them harder against the table to make it stop. The door opened and Marcus walked in, looking like he'd aged about 5 years in the last hour. He'd sent Owen to the hospital with Jessica while he stayed behind to deal with the cafe, make sure everything was locked up, but Rachel could see it written all over his face that leaving his kid had just about killed him. "You're still here," he said, and it wasn't a question. More like he was surprised she hadn't bolted the second she got the chance. Rachel didn't look up. "Yeah, well, figured I should stick around in case you needed to yell at me or something." Marcus crossed the room and dropped into the chair across from her, the same spot he'd been sitting in when this nightmare of a blind date started about 1 million years ago. "Why the hell would I yell at you?" he asked. "You saved him." "I just reacted," Rachel said, voice flat. "That's it. Just instinct." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, and she could feel him staring at her even though she still wouldn't meet his eyes. "The paramedics said if you'd waited even 30 more seconds, we'd be having a very different conversation right now," he said quietly. "So yeah, you saved my son's life, Rachel. You can downplay it all you want, but that's what happened." She finally looked at him, and God, the gratitude in his eyes was too much, way too much. "Don't," she said. "Don't make me into something I'm not." Marcus shook his head. "I had the EpiPen right there in my hand, and I froze. I'm his father, and I completely froze. You didn't." "You were scared," Rachel said. "Fear does that to people." "You weren't scared." She let out a bitter laugh. "I was terrified." The confession hung between them, and Marcus tilted his head, studying her like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "You said you used to be a paramedic," he said carefully. "What happened? Why'd you really quit?" Rachel's jaw tightened, and for a second she thought about lying. Thought about making up some easy answer that wouldn't crack her wide open in front of this guy she barely knew. But something about the way he was looking at her, no judgment, just genuine wanting to understand, made the truth come spilling out. "I froze when my husband had a heart attack," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. 2 years ago, in our kitchen, middle of a Tuesday morning, he collapsed right in front of me, and I knew exactly what to do. I'd done CPR 100 times on strangers, but when it was him lying there, I just stood there like an idiot for 45 seconds. She swallowed hard. By the time I snapped out of it and started compressions, it was already too late. Coroner said he probably died instantly, said nothing would have changed the outcome, but I'll never know for sure. And I couldn't carry that doubt onto every call, couldn't trust myself not to freeze again when it mattered. Marcus didn't try to tell her it wasn't her fault, didn't throw out any of that useless comfort people always tried to shove at her. He just nodded slowly, like he understood something about guilt that couldn't be fixed with words. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said after a minute. "Diane. Brain aneurysm, no warning, just didn't wake up one morning. Owen was only 3. Rachel felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry. She called me the night before," Marcus continued, staring at his hands now. "Said she had a killer headache, felt weird, wanted me to come home from my business trip early. And I told her to take some Tylenol and I'd be home the next day, like planned, because I had one more meeting that was apparently too important to miss." His voice cracked just slightly. "So I get it. I know about the what-ifs that eat you alive at 3 in the morning." They sat in that heavy silence for a while, two people carrying around the same kind of weight, just in different packages. Finally, Rachel said, "Your sister insisted I come to the hospital. She's very persuasive." Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's Jessica. Spent 15 years bossing around ER patients. Now she bosses around Café customers, and apparently her brother's disaster love life." Rachel almost laughed. "And this has got to be the worst blind date in human history." "I don't know," Marcus said, standing up. "You saved my kid's life. That's got to count for something." He held out his hand. "Come on. Owen's asking for you." The hospital waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and bad coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. Jessica spotted them the second they walked in and rushed over to hug Rachel so hard it knocked the breath out of her lungs. "Thank you," Jessica kept saying over and over. "Thank you, thank you." Rachel stood there awkwardly, never great with people thanking her for just doing what needed doing. When Jessica finally let go, she said, "Owen wants to see you. He won't stop asking." Rachel's eyes went wide. "Me? Why would he want to see me?" Marcus smiled. "Because you're the cool lady who gave him a shot and saved his life. You're basically a superhero now." Owen's hospital room was small and dim, machines beeping softly in the corner. The kid was propped up in bed, IV taped to his small arm, but grinning like he'd just won the lottery when Rachel walked in. "Miss Rachel," he said, way too loud for someone who'd almost died an hour ago. "You gave me a shot. It hurt, but you saved me." Rachel sat carefully on the edge of his bed, her whole face softening in a way Marcus hadn't seen before. "How you feeling, brave guy?" "Okay," Owen said. "Dad said you're a hero." Rachel shook her head. "I'm not a hero, Owen." The kid looked at her very seriously. "Dad said the same thing about himself after Mom died. But Aunt Jess says people who save people are always heroes, even if they don't know it." Rachel's eyes filled up fast and she had to look away before the tears actually fell. Later, Marcus walked her out to the parking lot. The November air was freezing, stars sharp and bright overhead, the kind of night that felt too clear, too exposed. "I need to know something," Marcus said as they reached her beat-up Honda. "Why did you really quit?" "The real reason." Rachel stopped with her hand on the car door. "I told you." I froze. "But you didn't freeze tonight," he pointed out. She turned to face him, and the look on her face was so raw it hurt to see. "Tonight wasn't my husband," she said simply. Marcus nodded, like that made perfect sense. And maybe it did. They stood there for a minute, just breathing the cold air, before he said, "Owen's gonna ask about you. He doesn't let people go easily once he decides he likes them." "Marcus, I can't be part of this," Rachel said, shaking her head. "I'm not trying to ask you to be," he replied. "I'm just saying thank you. And if you ever want terrible coffee and a 6-year-old's dinosaur facts, you know where to find us." She almost smiled. "Almost. Your coffee's not that terrible." "Yeah, it really is," Marcus said. And he was definitely smiling now. As she climbed into her car, Marcus tapped on the window and she rolled it down. "Jessica's gonna try to adopt you now. Fair warning," he said. "She adopts every stray she finds." "I'm not a stray," Rachel said, but there wasn't much heat behind it. "Could have fooled me," Marcus said gently. She drove home in silence, streetlights blurring past, her mind replaying the whole night on an endless loop. When she got to her apartment, she sat in the car for 20 minutes before finally going inside. She dug through her glove compartment, pushing past old receipts and a broken pair of sunglasses until her fingers closed around the familiar leather of her old paramedic badge. She'd kept it, couldn't bring herself to throw it away, even though looking at it felt like staring at a ghost. Rachel sat there holding the badge, turning it over in her hands, and for the first time in 2 years, she let herself wonder if maybe the person she used to be wasn't completely dead. Maybe she was just buried. And maybe tonight, when her hands moved without thinking and saved a little boy's life, maybe that was her starting to dig her way back up. She didn't know if that terrified her or gave her hope. Probably both. 2 weeks later, Rachel pushed open the cafe door for what had to be the 4th time that week, telling herself the same lie she'd been spinning since this whole thing started. Just coffee, just checking in. Then I'm gone. Except she kept coming back, like the place had some kind of gravitational pull she couldn't shake. She ordered the same thing every time, chamomile tea and a blueberry muffin, and always sat at a different table, because sitting at their table felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. But Owen spotted her anyway. The kid had radar or something and came running over like she was his long-lost best friend. "Miss Rachel!" he yelled, loud enough that half the cafe turned to look. She couldn't help smiling, genuine and surprised that the expression still felt natural on her face. Owen dragged her over to where Marcus sat, looking exhausted and buried in paperwork, coffee going cold next to his laptop. "You don't have to sit with us," Marcus said, but there wasn't much conviction behind it. I know, Rachel said, sliding into the booth anyway. But your kid's persistent. Owen showed her his drawings, dinosaurs, and stick figures, and she noticed one labeled Dad, me, Aunt Jess, Miss Rachel, and her throat went tight. You put me in your picture? She asked quietly. Owen nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You're part of our mourning now. Marcus shot her an apologetic look, but she shook her head slightly. Honestly, she didn't mind. That was the scary part. After Jessica took Owen to school, Marcus and Rachel sat in the almost empty cafe. The morning rush died down to just the two of them and the hiss of the espresso machine. You don't have to keep checking on us, Marcus said. Rachel stared into her tea. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I just like the company. Our tea's mediocre at best, he pointed out. She smiled. Yeah, well, maybe the company makes up for it. They talked about their dead spouses the way people who'd actually lived through that kind of loss could. No tiptoeing around it, no treating grief like some dirty secret. Marcus told her about Diane, how she didn't wake up one morning, and how Owen still asked questions he didn't know how to answer. Rachel told him about David, 32 years old with a heart that gave out like some cruel joke, family history nobody knew about until it was way too late. Jessica roped them into helping with the cafe's community dinner that night. Total ambush, but Rachel found herself saying yes before she could think better of it. They worked side by side, chopping vegetables and plating food, and it felt weirdly normal, like maybe she could have a life that didn't revolve around counting boxes in a warehouse and going home to an empty apartment. Mrs. Chen, Owen's old babysitter, watched them work and said with a knowing smile, "You two make a good team." Both of them started with, "Oh, we're not," but she cut them off. "Didn't say you were. Said you make a good team." Rachel felt her face go hot. The dinner rush hit hard and fast. Cafe packed with people laughing and talking, and Rachel was carrying a tray of plates when everything just stopped. The room tilted sideways, her vision going spotty at the edges, and she heard the tray crash to the floor from somewhere very far away. Her legs went out from under her, and she grabbed for the counter but missed. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground, his voice sharp with panic. "Rachel? Rachel?" She could hear him but couldn't make her mouth work to answer, everything going fuzzy and dark. The last thing she remembered was mumbling, "I'm sorry, David, I'm sorry," before the world went completely black. Rachel woke up to the steady beep of hospital monitors and Marcus asleep in the chair next to her bed, his head tilted at an angle that was going to wreck his neck. She tried to slip out quietly, but the IV tugged at her arm and he jerked awake. "Don't even think about it," he said, voice rough from sleep. "I'm fine. I need to get to work," she said, already reaching for the IV. Marcus stood up fast. "You collapsed in my cafe. You're not fine." She glared at him. "I don't need you to fix me, Marcus." "I'm not trying to fix you," he shot back. "I'm trying to be your friend." That word friend stopped her cold, because when was the last time anyone had been that? The doctor came in with news that made Rachel want to disappear into the floor. Severe malnutrition, depression. She hadn't been taking care of herself for God knows how long. After the doctor left, Marcus asked quietly, "You don't have anyone, do you?" Rachel stared at the ceiling. "David's family blames me. Mine lives halfway across the country. So yeah, I'm alone." "Not anymore," Marcus said, and he meant it. He drove her home because she had nobody else to call, and when they walked into her apartment, Marcus went quiet in a way that said everything. Barely any furniture, no pictures on the walls, expired meals for one in the fridge. "How long have you been living like this?" he asked. Rachel's voice cracked. "Does it matter?" "Yeah," he said, "it does." She broke then, really broke. Told him everything about the fight she'd had with David that morning. The last words she ever said to him, being angry and petty, coming home to find him dead on the kitchen floor. Marcus sat on the floor next to her and shared his own guilt. How Diane begged him not to go on that business trip. How he went anyway. How he got the call during a meeting that she was already gone. "Does it get easier?" Rachel whispered. "No," Marcus said honestly, "but you get stronger." Before she could respond, someone knocked and Jessica appeared with Owen carrying a care package. The kid ran straight to Rachel and handed her a crayon drawing, a stick figure labeled Miss Rachel with a big red heart. "This is you with a happy heart," Owen said seriously. "Dad says you lost yours, so I drew you a new one." Rachel completely lost it. Good tears this time, and Owen hugged her tight. "It's okay to cry. Dad cries too sometimes." Jessica invited her to Thanksgiving at the cafe, and Owen jumped in before Rachel could say no. "But you are family," he insisted. Marcus nodded. "Owen's right. You are, if you want to be." Rachel looked at these three people who barely knew her, but wouldn't let her fall. "Okay," she whispered. After they left, Rachel found her old paramedic certification and Googled recertification programs. She didn't know if she was ready to save lives again, but maybe she was ready to start saving her own. Thanksgiving Day hit Second Chance's Café like a warm explosion of people and noise, and the smell of turkey that could wake the dead. Tables pushed together, string lights everywhere. At least 30 locals crammed in, eating and laughing like this was exactly where they belonged. Marcus was losing his mind in the kitchen, but in a good way, and Owen ran around with other kids like he'd mainlined pure sugar. Rachel sat in her car outside for 20 minutes, hand on the keys, ready to bail. Then Owen spotted her through the window and waved so hard his whole body moved, and she couldn't drive away from that kid if her life depended on it. She walked in and Owen grabbed her hand immediately. "You sit with us!" He planted her between him and Marcus, and when Jessica gave the blessing and thanked the community for new friends who became family, Rachel had to look away before she started crying in front of everybody. Everything was going perfect until old Mr. Patterson started choking on a piece of turkey. The cafe went dead silent and Rachel's whole body locked up, flashbacks hitting her like a freight train. David on the floor, her frozen, unable to move. She couldn't breathe. Marcus leaned close and whispered, "You've got this. I'm right here." Something in his voice cut through the panic, and her hands moved on autopilot, Heimlich maneuver perfect and clean. Mr. Patterson coughed up the turkey and everyone clapped, but Rachel ran outside. Marcus found her hyperventilating on the back patio. "I froze again," she said through tears. "But you didn't," he said firmly. "You saved him." She sobbed into his shoulder, and he just held her until she could breathe again. "I'm so tired of being afraid," she whispered. "Then stop being afraid alone," Marcus said. 3 months later, Rachel walked into the cafe wearing her paramedic uniform, first day back on the job. Owen ran over yelling, "You look like a superhero!" And Marcus made her good luck tea with that smile that still made her stomach flip. Her partner Jenkins called from the door, "Hayes, we gotta roll." And she took a deep breath. Owen hugged her tight. "You're the bravest person I know. Braver than dinosaurs." She laughed through happy tears. "That's pretty brave, buddy." Her first call was a kid with allergic reaction, and she saved him without hesitation. Later, looking at a photo of Marcus, Owen, Jessica, and her at Christmas, she whispered, "Thanks, David. I got this now." That evening, she walked into the closed cafe where Marcus and Owen had made her dinner. Spaghetti, slightly burned, perfect. They ate at their original table, and after Owen fell asleep, Marcus took her hand. "First day back, how was it?" Rachel looked around at the cafe, at the sleeping kid, at the man who wouldn't let her give up. "Terrifying, but right. Proud of you," he said quietly. "You know," Rachel said, "I came to that blind date because I owe Jessica my life." Marcus smiled. "And now?" "Now I come because this feels like living." Outside, snow started falling on Second Chance's Café. Inside, 3 broken people sat together in warm light. Not a perfect family, but a real one. And that was more than enough. Sometimes the worst blind date becomes the life you never knew you needed. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale of second chances and found families. Click one of the videos on your screen, because every story we share might be the one that reminds you it's never too late to